So welcome y'all to our Fireside chat. We are going to be talking today about the census. It occurs every 10 years, and we'll talk a little bit more about what the census means. But to set up this platform, we have a group of really awesome people that are here to speak with us. We also might have some people jumping in like every so often, like joining our meeting that are a part of the Legislative Affairs Committee and or other groups and clubs and orgs on campus to get their perspective on the census and how they fill it out or why they fill it out. But for now, this conversation is just built to talk about the census, talk about the history, talk about why people fill out the census, why it's important, and just different ways that we can encourage other people to fill out the census as well. So we're super excited to have y'all here listening to this conversation. But without further ado, I'd like to open up the conversation by having everyone in the room introducing themselves. So I'll start. My name is Bree Holbert. I am a third-year student at Chico State majoring in agriculture, science, and education. And I am the Director of Legislative Affairs. So I work with the Legislative Affairs Committee as the committee chair. But I also work with different offices on campus, and a few of those offices are here today. So yeah, that's a little bit about me. I'll popcorn to Ann.
Good morning, I'm Ann Schulte, and I am the Director of Civic Engagement on campus. I'm also faculty in the School of Education, and I support the Legislative Affairs Council in all their really good work.
I guess I can go next. My name is Trevor. I'm a graduating senior majoring in political science, and I'm also the president of the Associated Students. Outgoing.
Trevor, you want to popcorn to somebody?
I guess I'll go next. Hi, I'm Logan Lee. I am a first year here at CSU Chico with a major of agriculture science and education. I am currently I'll popcorn to Michelle.
Okay. Hi, my name is Michelle. I'm a freshman majoring in agriculture communications, and I am serving this year on the Legislative Affairs Committee with Bree. I will popcorn to Megan.
All right. My name is Megan Smith. I am a program coordinator with the North Valley Community Foundation, and I am sort of leading the charge for census outreach in Butte County for our hard-to-count populations, which includes our Butte County Complete Count Committee, which Ann Schulte sits on. So we are so grateful to have her part of that. And I will popcorn to Damien.
Alrighty, so hello, I'm Damien. I'm a graduating senior majoring in agriculture education, and I'm currently the vice chair for the Legislative Affairs Committee.
Awesome. Thanks, y'all. I think the connection kind of like teetered in and out for some of us, which is totally okay. But apologies on that. And as I asked these questions and kind of facilitate this conversation, if you can't hear me, just put in the chat, Bree, you're kind of like, staticky. And then when like someone else is like speaking, so they're giving their answer to a question, maybe wait until the like is over and their voice catches up and then like jump in. So that way we know like, oh, okay, they like finish their thoughts so we don't like pile on top of each other. But the first thing, thank you, Ann. Can you see me moving? Am I good? Oh, you can't see me moving? Okay, I'm talking. That's okay. Y'all can hear me speak? Okay. So the first question that we have that our Legislative Affairs Committee kind of compiled together is, what is the census to you? So I'm gonna grab that question and go. So what is the census to you?
I can start. Okay. I think like one thing that I feel like is really interesting and like cool for me personally for the census is like this is like my first year that I'm going to like actually like participate in it, because like 10 years ago I was a lot younger, and like I mean, my parents did it all for me. And like now, like serving on the Legislative Affairs Committee, now I like fully understand like what the census is about. So I think it's really cool that like my freshman year in college, like I will have this experience and this opportunity to be able to like share with other students, like the events that we did throughout the year, talking about like the voter registration as well as the census. So I just feel like overall, this is like a really cool opportunity and experience that I get to have this year.
I think for me, the census is a way of the US being able to count how much our population grows each year. And like within 10 years, we're able to get calculations on how many folks are like, how much is our population growing by, and just giving numbers. And being an ag major, it's really important for us because as future farmers, we must know how much our population is growing so that we can feed them in the future. But that's what the census means to me.
I think y'all bring up really awesome points. Yeah, that you know, as a young person, like we haven't had the opportunity to really engage in the sense, and now we get to. And that's a really powerful place to be in, because it helps us to understand like what our population is comprised of, and also like be able to like, you know, contribute in a way that like, I don't know, that we really haven't gotten the opportunity to contribute before. We understand census like is each person that gets counted is like a bunch of money that goes to our county, which is really awesome. And it aligns our like the voting lines a certain way. And then Megan can like articulate that probably a lot better than. But all that to say, like we have a lot of agency in the census. And I think y'all bring up really great points that agency allows us to see what impact we can make in the future. Thank you for that. Would anyone else like to like contribute or jump in with what the census means to them?
I like that you use the word agency, Bree, because I feel like for me at least, the census is a way to let my voice be heard in terms of the federal government. So it's a way for me to tell the federal government that, hey, I'm here, and that in some ways my existence deserves to be recognized. And that's something that's really important for people who, at least in this country, tend to sometimes be systematically written to the, I don't want to say written outside of the box, but somewhat existing on sort of the peripheral of society. So I think, like I said, for me, it's something that's super important to be recognized, federally at least.
Can I ask you about that, Megan? Because one of the questions that has come up, because you were talking about outside the box, and one of the conversations we've had is questions on the census that sometimes people have to choose a box that doesn't necessarily align with how they would identify. Can you speak to that a little bit and talk about maybe any history of that, or how we might participate in making those questions better, or anything about how that happens and how we could participate in improving that experience for people?
Yeah. So the Federal Census Bureau and the census itself, the questionnaire, has actually adapted and evolved over time. And that is because of certain movements like the Civil Rights Movement. Previously, I'm not even sure exactly the timeline, but the way racial and ethnic groups used to be identified is that the enumerator would actually put on the paperwork what they thought the person was. So they have made steps forward. There's still quite a lot of progress to be made. As somebody who myself is Egyptian American, it's difficult for me personally, even when I filled out my census, I had to choose because according to the census, I identify as Caucasian racially, but ethnically I identify as Egyptian. And they give me 2 boxes for that to some extent, but I don't necessarily identify as Caucasian. So that proposed a bit of an internal conflict and dialogue that I had to sit with for a while. And that's something that I've experienced most of my life when filling out college applications, or I remember even like STAR testing when we were little. So it's definitely something that has reoccurred for me, but in that same vein of thought, there is a lot of positive movement happening towards advocating for positive change in the sense of having more inclusive questions on the census. So there are quite a lot of advocacy groups that are participating in these conversations actively and making moves and progressing things forward to bring about positive change to those questions. I know there were a lot of advocacy groups pushing for a MENA category to be added, which is Middle Eastern, North African category, so that those individuals who are from the Middle East don't necessarily get categorized with Caucasian, because again, that in some aspects can lead to sort of a wiping out of an ethnic experience or devaluing it. Like I said, so being counted for me is saying that my existence is here and that I want to be recognized as an Egyptian American. So I have a lot of solace in the fact that there are so many things happening going forward in regards to that advocacy happening. Also, just an example of the ACLU advocating against the citizenship question is probably the biggest and most famous example of groups that have rallied behind what they saw or deemed as unconstitutional in terms of census questions. So yeah, there's a lot of things that are happening. There are a lot of things that continue to happen in terms of advocacy. And I think it's really just about paying attention and staying attuned to that. And I know the ACLU is an organization that I love and participate in with rather frequently. So I think it's just that concept of us staying active in being aware of what's happening and participating in the causes that we see or deem important in terms of bringing about positive change to the census questions. Hopefully that was helpful.
Yeah, that was extremely helpful. Thank you so much. I was actually going to ask, how does that reflect? I guess it kind of reflects in the same way, I'm sure. Well, I don't know. Is there people advocating for folks that like don't identify with a certain gender well or a certain sex? Because there is that question on the census that asks like, are you male or female? And some people are like, I'm non-binary, so which one do I pick?
Yeah, and that's definitely something that I feel like one of the things that the census questionnaire doesn't necessarily account for is that internal psychology and the internal discussion that happens and the impact that can have on individuals who are forced to in some ways be put into a box that they may not identify with. And with that being said, like mentioned before, there are plenty of groups advocating, like Equality California, EQUA. They are sort of on the front lines of LGBTQ plus advocacy, especially in the census. And even in the 2020 census, they have played a huge and major role in not just outreach, but also, like I said, advocacy and bringing about positive change to those questions. And this year, actually, the 2020 census is the first year that people are going to be allowed to identify as same-sex couples or same-sex marriages, which is really exciting. So it's one of those processes where it's, you know, one step forward and maybe it might feel like 2 steps backwards. But I think it's that concept that we are in this for the long haul and those advocacy groups that know the importance of what's at stake are just going to keep advocating. And that's super comforting to me, and something that I like to participate in. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Megan, for for offering that perspective. Yeah, I definitely think that we can't fix all problems all at once, but there's a lot of work left to be done, especially with the census. I wanted to get a lot of folks' perspective on this conversation. How do you feel about the census in general? Does it hit all the marks? When we think about like the census, like and us being counted, it changes a whole lot for us for the next 10 years, and it provides income for certain areas, and it changed a lot for our area. And so what are our thoughts about like the census not hitting every single mark? And do we agree with Megan? What other things are there?
I think for me, Megan pretty much hit all the points that I also see or think about too. But yeah, that's like my three parts of it.
I think it's kind of interesting. I think Megan, how you talked about how same-sex couples are finally going to be able to put on the census, because back in 2010, obviously, the Supreme Court case hadn't happened yet. So it just kind of goes to show you, I think sometimes, I think we all know that 10 years is a long time, but it's kind of cool to reflect on that and see how much our society has changed in the 10 years, and how much kind of, I guess, different social, I guess, how we've progressed socially, and just how different it is. I think it's really exciting.
Sometimes people have asked me, why don't they ask more questions on the census? Like, we could be learning so much more if we were asking, more detailed questions and more information. And I've talked with them that, the census does do other kinds of surveys over the course of those years to do sort of sampling surveys. But yeah, I was just wondering, like, how do those questions get picked, and why them, and have we ever dropped questions off? Do you know?
I'm not entirely sure about that in detail. I do know that there have been historically different categories brought to the census in terms of like businesses being accounted for. Previously, at the turn of the century, there wasn't, they only accounted for the head of the household, so the one person individually. They didn't even account for everybody in the household. So there is adaptations happening year after year to those questions. But I am not entirely sure what the process is for the Federal Census Bureau to decide on those questions. But like I said, I do know that there are a lot of groups and organizations that have a lot to say about the validity of those questions and the security of those questions. So yeah, hopefully that was answered your question.
I'm just curious. There's a lot of information to know, and I'm surprised at how much there is to know, and I'm constantly asked questions I don't know the answer to.
Me too.
Megan, if you could, for the folks that are going to be watching this later, if you could give us like a little bit of like a synopsis on the census, as well as like what does it do for like just everyday people after the census is being filled out and after it's been recorded, and what does it do?
Sure. So basically what the census does, it is a decennial count of the population of the United States, regardless of citizenship status. So whether or not you are a permanent resident is null and void. It is something that is used to, the data comes in, it is compiled, and what the Federal Census Bureau does is they output it into statistical data. So your personal information goes into a bank, it becomes depersonalized, and it comes out as a number that helps the federal government decide where to spend or send $800 billion annually. So that is, as somebody had put it once, it's like a whole pizza, and by filling out your census, it's saying we want, or our community wants, a piece of that pizza. So either way, the federal government is going to be distributing out that entire pizza, but the size of the piece, or whether or not you get one, is dependent upon how many people fill out the census. So in the state of California, in the fiscal year of 2016, we received $115 billion due to census data. So we had enough people in this state to tell the federal government that, hey, we need X amount of money. They did their calculation and decided, okay, they need 115 billion, which is substantial. If you think about 800 billion that's distributed annually, that's a pretty big chunk of the pie that California gets. And that's one, because we are such a populated state. And that funding goes to programs like the Pell Grant, which got over $3.5 billion added to it in 2016, which paid for me to go to college at Chico State, which I know paid for a lot of my friends to go to college at Chico State. That funding also goes to run social programs like SNAP, which is a program that also I think is partnershiped with the Wildcat Food Pantry on campus. It is used to run programs like special education and breakfast programs and school lunch programs. So a lot of that data is compiled and utilized to bring in funding for social programs, and to also show where those social programs need to maybe be implemented or bolstered. So if there's a huge influx in a community in LA from one census to another, maybe their school program or their school lunch program is going to need more funding because maybe they have double the amount of students now. Aside from those social programs, it also helps draw redistricting lines for elections. So one of my coworkers often says that if you have somebody who is a political entity, so like an assemblyman or somebody, and they don't know that they have a huge Hmong population in their community, and a bill comes across their table that may potentially impact that community, they may not vote the same way on that bill simply because they just don't know that it could highly impact part of their population. So by telling the federal government that we're here and that we exist, it's a chance for not only redistricting lines to be drawn, but it's a chance for us to be visible in the political realm, and to have decisions made on our part. So for me, that's really comforting. But yeah, those redistricting lines are another question in and of themselves, because they do pack a heavy punch, especially in terms of the House of Representatives. So we get seats in the House of Representatives based on census data. And again, because California is such a populated state, we have a very large number of seats in the House at the moment. And for me personally, I would like to keep it that way. So again, if you're somebody who wants to see representation in the federal government, being counted in your census is one way to do that. But yeah, that's a little synopsis.
I would just add also that, and it's important for California because I think that there's a potential for us to lose a House seat if we don't have a full count. But also for Butte County, it's really important because we've had 10,000 people displaced due to the Camp Fire. And all college students are counted in the community where they go to college. So it's very, very important for everyone, including the college students who maybe have gone home already for the end of the semester, to still be counted in Chico, because that's where they typically would be without a pandemic. And so we really need them to be counted here, especially because of all the situation related to Camp Fire, but also because this is where they are counted. This is where they typically would be, and this is where those services would be delegated to because they go to college here. So I just want to point out that it's important locally as a state, and also at the federal level, that we have an accurate census count.
One thing I like to talk about is like, I live in the Avenues, and for anybody who's driven down Cedar recently, that that road is a little rough, and census data and the funding that comes in from that actually helps to repair those roads above and beyond the social programs. So I know they just built those beautiful apartments, but I was laughing because it's such an awful road getting to them. And I know it is difficult to traverse. So by filling out your census, in essence, we're bringing in more funding to support the community that we all utilize. So supporting the services, like Anne had said, that are here for us, and understanding that it's based on where you live most of the time. So if you're somebody who lives in, say, San Francisco 20% of the time, and then 75% of the time you live on campus at Chico State, you're still counted at your residence at Chico State, because that's where you use the most resources. So that's where that funding needs to be funneled to, if that makes sense. It is a bit of a complicated process, but as Anne had said, it really is critical, especially for Butte County post-Camp Fire. There are a lot of Chico State students who were affected by the Camp Fire, and it's something that our community could use the funding to help rebuild the city of Paradise. I know the North Valley Community Foundation and my work sort of sit on the front lines of those efforts right now. And these are active conversations that we're having about, everybody deserves to be counted. And it's really important for the federal government to see places like Paradise and not just write them off and say, oh, well, they got enough assistance already from FEMA or whoever else it might have been. But to say, no, those people are still there. And a lot of them are living in alternative housing at the moment, whether it's a trailer or a tent or a temporary home on their property of some sort. So it, again, is critical for resources to be brought in.
And I just want to like jump in real quick, because I think a lot of the misconceptions, and there's a question on here about common misconceptions. Totally, anyone jump in if you have a question or if you want to hear some common misconceptions about the census. But I think one that pops into my mind is that students, especially like if they're like upperclassmen, like they're about to leave, they're like, well, why would I count myself in Chico? Like, I understand all these things are happening, but why would I count myself in Chico if I'm going to end up moving back home? And for the next 10 years, like that would add, value to my home back at home. Like, what would you say to that argument to a student?
Well, what I say is, it's really not about you as a person. The census is a count of a demographic. And so even though you're going to go someplace, this year and not come back, somebody else is going to be in your spot who is more or less like you. So you're holding a spot for someone like you. And then we're counting that person to know what is the general demographic of this place. And that's why, as Megan was saying, your personal information actually gets de-identified, and your demographic is the thing that stays. And that's the thing that we want an understanding of who is here, not individually, but as a demographic. But I can appreciate that question, because it seems like, because you're putting your name on it and you're giving personal information about yourself, it seems like it's about you. and it is, but it's actually just about you as part of a whole, as a way of understanding the whole community. And that's kind of what I like about this act, is that it is our part as part of a whole, and that we are one piece of the fabric, and it's about us, but in the end, it's really just about who we are as a community, and that makes me feel hopeful about participating.
Thank you so much, Anne, for sharing that. I agree. I agree with you fully. I definitely think that we have to step outside of ourselves and be like, okay, like who's coming in after me? And that's a really good way to think about the census, especially for upperclassmen too. Are there any other like common misconceptions that we might have about the census for us students in the room? And that's totally okay if you don't. Totally fine. I do have, we hit a lot of the questions, and this has been a really fruitful dialogue. And if there's any other additions to, like, we'd want to share more with students about the census, please add in. But I do have one last question that we kind of hit like a lot of the questions through this conversation. One question, actually, yes, one question on here. It's why should college students fill out the census? We kind of hit that. I'm trying to think. In your eyes, like, and this might be reiterating, but I'm kind of like trying to put two questions together. So what is the value moving forward of the census? Does that make sense? Like, what is the value of the census, like, moving forward? And anyone can jump in and answer that.
So I think for me, the value of the census is to have a full and accurate count of everybody that's living in this country. Because I feel like there are certain groups who are marginalized and, like I had said, exist sort of on the outskirts of that box. And for me personally, it's really important to have an accurate account of who resides here, because again, with that statement earlier of if there are bills and legislation happening that's going to affect a specific ethnic group, I would hope that we would have an accurate count of how many of those individuals are actually here. And not only that, though, an accurate account of the demographics of the nation allows for legislation on a federal level to be passed and upheld. So things like job discrimination and civil rights movements all can be fueled and leveraged with that information. But if the federal government doesn't know who those people are, the status quo will stay the status quo. So I think if you are somebody like myself who wants to see positive social change, it's critical for me. It's critical for my family. It's critical for somebody who, you know, is the product of an immigrant who came to this country for a better future and a better chance at life. And I think for me personally, it's a way of paying homage to my grandma who came to this country and saying, you know what, you may not have been allowed to be counted in your census until you had been here for over 50 years, but I can be counted now and I can be a representative of that. And for me, that's so critical and so important. And again, it's sort of a personal cause, and it's sort of a personal mission for me, but I don't think you can take away the value of that, the value of being recognized federally as somebody who looks a certain way or is of a specific ethnic group. And granted, the questions do have a lot of issues and there are some struggles still happening. But I think going forward, it's going to be amazing, as Trevor had said, to see kind of how far we can progress. I mean, I have a bachelor's degree in cultural anthropology from Chico State, and this is something that's really, really, really important to me and exciting to me. And I love the multiculturalism of this country, and I would like to see us accurately represented. But that's just my personal perception. But yeah.
I think I would agree with you, Megan. I think there's a lot of value in like representing like the whole like scope of like the United States and like the different cultures that are here. And I think a lot of the questions on the census, like we talked about, like doesn't necessarily like dive into like the like each and every culture. And it also doesn't like obviously like this citizenship question isn't on there for varying reasons. However, like I still think there's value in like knowing like who in our country like needs like who in our country like needs the most help now. And I definitely think like who are people of color, who are marginalized, who are low socioeconomic, like very low socioeconomic, like need to be known. And I think that's, for me, that's the value of the census, is like this, like by being counted, regardless of citizenship, regardless of where you come from, or like if you're in college or if you're not, it's important. So that way like people know like what makes up the fabric of our country, and that way we can support people in like the best way possible with the funding and with representation, for sure. So I think that I retweet everything that you said. I think that would be the value I see in the census. Would anyone else like to share the value they see in the census?
I'll say something.
Yeah.
I definitely think that doing the census is a small way to kind of give back to your community a little bit. And although like I am like someone that we talked about earlier, like a graduating senior who's going to be leaving this area after I graduate, I definitely still like am very much like a part of this community. And I definitely want to make sure that people like me that come fill my spot, as we talked about afterwards, like people who are college students coming to Chico State, are able to take advantage out of all the great things about the community that I was able to, if not more. Things we talked about, like the roads and everything like that. So I definitely understand as a college student, like life isn't always easy. And why would I want to take away like some future college students representation in this community? I definitely think that a lot of times in college towns, especially, like college students can kind of be forgotten about because maybe they aren't always registered to vote in the community. Maybe they want to register to vote back home, or and they are gone for a few months out of the year. But they do take advantage out of so much of the community and really help stimulate that community's economy. And that's very true for Chico as well. So I definitely, as someone who is a college student, can see that this is my chance to give back to the future college students that'll be coming here in the next 10 years at Chico State to like be represented.
Thank you so much, Damien. Would anyone else like the opportunity to share?
I'll say one thing. I think like the whole conversation just like makes me think of like that common phrase, just like being a part of something larger than yourself. And so I think it's just like so important to really be selfless and to really give back to the community, especially like specifically talking about Chico that has really been through so much, that I think it's just so important that we just keep advocating for the importance of the census and just really keeping people educated so they know why it is important to fill out the census.
I agree, Michelle. And through this conversation, I hope the folks that are watching it, we know that this is pre-recorded, so you can't really like ask us any questions. But if you do have any questions, or if you want to know more, definitely go to the census website and reach out to folks, fill out the census, get more information about it, and yeah, reach out. You can also call Megan too, or sorry, email Megan. And if you're interested in emailing Megan, feel free to email me or email Trevor. You can email or email Megan at msmith@nvcf.org. msmith@nvcf.org. I hope you had your pen and paper to write that down. Or again, you can reach out to Trevor, AS president at csuchico.edu, or AS Ledge at csuchico.edu, or you can reach out to Ann Schulte at A Schulte. No number, right?
It's actually AK Schulte at
Sorry, AK Schulte at csuchico.edu. AK Schulte. Cool. So if you need any information, please reach out to AS, Office of Engagement, or reach out to Megan Smith at Valley. Valley, can you?
The North Valley Community Foundation.
Thank you so much. I was missing the F, the North Valley Community Foundation. Thank you. Yes, you have a lot of resources, so please reach out, please share the census. It's really important, like we discussed today. Yeah, so thank you all for coming. Thank you all for listening. I really appreciate your participation.